If you look at a map of the United States from outer space, you'll immediately notice something odd. Half of the country is pitch black, even though more than a dozen states are scattered across this region. There is almost no light here, no major cities, and no bustling crowds. What's even stranger is, the dividing line between the bright and dark areas is almost perfectly straight, as if a giant ruler had been laid across the center of the American continent. Why does this happen? Why do 266 million people crowd on one side of the line, while the other side remains as empty as a desert? Some have pointed out, this line is not the result of human drawing, but is determined by water resources. It is shaped by mountain ranges, wind patterns, and rainfall regimes that have persisted for millions of years. And the more closely we observe, the more we notice this line is quietly shifting. On the map of the United States, every corner of this continent seems full of life. City lights stretch from Maine to Florida, from Chicago all the way to New York. Dense and brilliant lights, as if never ceasing. But once you draw a straight line through the continent's center from Canada to Texas, something eerie emerges. A vast empty zone looms before you, like a long scar carved into the continent's body. This area is neither desert, nor gloomy jungle, nor any forbidden enclave. This is the Great Plains of North America. A vast, fertile plain, theoretically capable of supporting millions of settlers. But the reality is, human presence lingers only at its edges. Omaha, Kansas City, Oklahoma City, San Antonio, these major cities seem to guard an invisible boundary. It is this line that splits America's civilized world into two distinct parts. One side is densely populated and noisy. The other is a silent, empty wilderness. East of this line, over 80% of Americans reside. West of the line, on this vast land covering over 1/3 of the American continent, only about 20% of the population lives. What's even more perplexing is, there are no walls blocking the way, no wide rivers as natural barriers, nor any administrative boundaries forcing people to choose sides. So what drives millions to settle on one side, while abandoning the other as worthless? Actually, people noticed this phenomenon over a century ago. Around 1878, a scholar named John Wesley Powell examined America with a fresh perspective. While government officials and pioneers saw this land as virgin territory to be developed, Powell discerned a hidden yet crucial pattern. He realized, this mysterious line dividing America was not a cultural or economic boundary, but a hydrological divide. Powell discovered, near the 100th meridian west, America's natural landscape undergoes a complete transformation. East of the meridian, rainfall is abundant, soil is moist, rivers are broad, and water-intensive crops like corn thrive. Traditional labor-intensive agriculture flourished here. Cities sprang up around farmland, closely connected. Trade activities boomed. Industrial systems gradually established, and population surged. But once you cross this line looking west, everything begins to decline. This decline is slow yet unstoppable. Soil becomes dry and poor. Rivers gradually dry up. Rainfall becomes scarcer. Only drought-resistant crops like wheat or grasslands supporting livestock survive. This is not merely a difference in crops, but a division between two completely different modes of survival. Agriculture in the West doesn't require thousands of laborers, operating instead with large machinery and vast open lands. The result is an economy of massive scale, yet with consistently extremely low population density. And this is the most puzzling part. This dividing line is too precise, too stable, and too coincidental to be merely a result of simple climate differences. What causes half of this continent to suffer such extreme aridity, while the other half remains vibrant? Powell actually provided the answer long ago. That is water. So why has Central America been so water deficient from the start? To understand why Central America is arid with little rain, we must look far west to the Rocky Mountains, the Cascade Range, and the Sierra Nevada. These mountain ranges are like ancient, silent guardians, quietly determining the fate of the entire continent. Moist air masses from the Pacific carry rainfall inland, which should nourish half of America. But once these air masses hit the western mountains, everything changes. The air is forced to rise. Temperatures drop. And rainfall pours down on the western slopes. By the time the air descends east of the mountains, it has become extremely dry. Because of this, Seattle, on the western side of the mountains, receives nearly 1.000 millimeters of annual precipitation, while Spokane, just a few hours' drive east of the mountains, gets only 200 to 300 millimeters annually, less than a quarter of Seattle's. This extreme precipitation difference doesn't occur just once or twice by chance, but happens year after year for centuries. This is the so-called rain shadow effect. The arid shadow cast by the mountains leaves the entire region east of the mountains almost devoid of moisture. And the problem doesn't end there. The eastern mountains of the US are lower in elevation, unable to block moisture from the Atlantic. Warm, moist air from the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico keeps the east humid. But this moisture struggles to reach deep into the continental interior. In fact, the Great Plains' main water source comes from the Gulf of Mexico, carried by a low-level airflow called the Great Plains Low-Level Jet. All these factors combined place Central America in a climatic pincer. Nature seems to have turned off the water tap here. This land is too far from the ocean, too close to the mountains, and rainfall is too scarce to support the formation and growth of major cities. But if the problem truly lies only in water resources, why have many other arid regions in the world developed and prospered? Why, even with rapid technological advancement, has the pattern of this empty zone in America remained unchanged? In 1607, when the English first set foot on the American continent, they began establishing settlements from the humid, fertile, and easily farmed eastern coastal areas. It was from this Atlantic coastal zone, the original 13 colonies, that large ports gradually rose. Trade hubs and urban networks formed, driving people to expand westward. Yet when the westward push attempted to penetrate Central America, pioneers encountered a new barrier. This barrier was not a stone wall like the Rockies, but came from the indigenous people of this land. The Great Plains and the vast regions beyond were home to some of the most formidable indigenous tribes in American history. From the Sioux, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Comanche, to the Apache in the southern plains. They were skilled riders, agile buffalo hunters, and warriors intimately familiar with every inch of their land. For decades, the staunch resistance of indigenous peoples made America's westward expansion arduous. The process was far slower than anticipated, more costly, and bloodier. Pioneer wagon trains were repeatedly attacked. Railroad workers suffered constant harassment. The government even needed to deploy hundreds of soldiers to secure a single supply line. In the eyes of the US government, this central plain was no longer a promised land to be developed, but a battlefield. The Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 marked the ultimate defeat of indigenous resistance. But by then, America was already transformed. The eastern coastal region had become the nation's economic heart. The Midwest had developed into the nation's breadbasket. Pacific coast cities flourished with global trade. And the Great Plains were left completely behind, because it missed the best opportunity to integrate into the wave of civilized development. When pioneers finally arrived here, they discovered the harsh warning nature had long issued: extreme climate, remote location from the sea, temperatures that could swing dozens of degrees within hours. This land is inherently more suited for large-scale farming and ranching than for building densely populated major cities. But if history and geography together created this empty zone, will its future be filled by humans? Or become even emptier? For over a century, this arid line dividing America seemed unchanging. But modern climate research shows this arid line is beginning to shift eastward, gradually approaching the 98th meridian west. A 2-degree difference in longitude might sound insignificant, but on a continental scale, it means hundreds of kilometers of American agricultural land are on the brink of turning into arid prairie like the Great Plains. In the nation's heartland, this eastward creeping arid line is step by step nearing the borders of Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas. Crop varieties are forced to change. Cultivated land continues to shrink. In modern history, for the first time, land considered America's humid core for a century is showing signs of arid climate. More worryingly, this is not short-term climate fluctuation, but real long-term change. This is a signal that Central America's climate is being swept up in global temperature changes. And the eastward shift of this line is just the tip of the iceberg of this larger climatic upheaval. In the western United States, extreme drought is altering the continent's climate pattern at an alarming rate. This transformation is most evident in the Colorado River. This river is the lifeline of the American West, sustaining over 40 million people. Its current flow is about 20% less than the 20th century average. Scientists even call the period since 2000 the most severe drought in 1.200 years. Water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell have hit historic lows, inching closer to the critical point where reservoirs can no longer release water downstream. Ironically, all this was predicted by Powell over a century ago. Powell once suggested the American West should be divided into administrative regions based on river watersheds, rather than relying on artificially drawn straight-line boundaries. But his proposal was ultimately rejected. The consequence is, now states constantly dispute over water from the same river, over-extracting river water, waiting desperately for increasingly scarce rainfall. If this trend continues, this once merely geographical curiosity of an invisible line may evolve into a social, economic, and even political dividing line in the future. So if this arid line continues, advancing eastward, will this superpower be divided once again? This time, dividing it would be not war, nor politics, but the geographical forces that have long been quietly reshaping the future map.